Okay, so I have spent the last 8 minutes talking and just now realized that I had not yet pressed record. So I'm going to have to do my second video today about Luke 2 over again. That's okay. I don't think I've ever done it before. That's the first time for everything, I suppose. Now, I'm going to read some Old Testament passages today in order to help set the context. Actually, I'm going to read one of them right now to help set the context for what we're about to read. This is Leviticus 12. We're going to read the entire chapter here. And we're going to read, and it says this. The Lord said to Moses, "Say to the Israelites, a woman who becomes pregnant and gives birth to a son will be ceremonially unclean for 7 days, just as she is unclean during her monthly period. On the 8th day, the boy is to be circumcised." That goes back to the covenant of circumcision that God made with Abraham and all the males of his household back in Genesis 17. Then the woman must wait 33 days to be purified from her bleeding. She must not touch anything sacred or go to the sanctuary until the days of her purification are over. If she gives birth to a daughter, for 2 weeks the woman will be unclean as during her period, and she must wait 66 days. I don't know why it's doubled. We mentioned that back when we read this chapter 3 years ago now. We're not going to do that again. When the days of her purification for a son or daughter are over, she is to bring to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting, or the temple in this case, a year-old lamb for a burnt offering, and a young pigeon or a dove for a sin offering. He shall offer them before the Lord to make atonement for her, and then she will be ceremonially clean from her flow of blood. These are the regulations for the woman who gives birth to a boy or a girl. If she cannot afford a lamb, she is to bring 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, one for a burnt offering and the other for a sin offering. In this way the priest will make atonement for her, and she will be clean. While we're here in the Old Testament, we're going to flip back into Exodus and also read this verse too. In Exodus 13, this is before they even left Egypt, while they're still getting ready for the first Passover. At the beginning of Exodus 13, right at the start, the Lord said to Moses, "Consecrate to me every firstborn male. The first offspring of every womb among the Israelites belongs to me, whether man or animal." And Jesus is Mary's firstborn son, so he will need to be consecrated and circumcised and purified. All these things will have to happen. He'll have to be consecrated, he'll have to be circumcised, Mary will have to be purified, atonement will have to be made for her after her pregnancy. So Luke is not going to get into the weeds of all these different things here, but he is going to cover this and show that, well, Joseph and Mary did all this stuff. On the 8th day, when it was time to circumcise him, he was named Jesus, the name the angel had given him before he had been conceived. So he was circumcised properly, at the right time, in the right manner, and given his proper official name, Jesus. When the time of their purification, according to the law of Moses, had been completed, so this is now 33 days after the circumcision, Mary has been unclean, ceremonially unclean, and now she is going to be has to be purified. Every time you were unclean, and everybody became unclean at some point or another. You weren't getting through life without ever being unclean. If you were an Old Testament Israelite, this is technically New Testament times, but they're still living under the Old Covenant here. If you were an Old Testament Israelite, you were not getting through, which, by the way, that would include literally every major character in the entire Bible. Okay? Even the New Testament people live the first half of their lives in the Old Testament covenant. So, everybody, you weren't getting through life without being unclean at some point. Now, women were unclean a lot because of their periods. They spent a good chunk of their time unclean due to that, but you weren't getting through life without ever being unclean, no matter who you were. And any time you became clean again, you had to go through a process to be declared ceremonially clean. In this case, it is for Mary what we read about in Leviticus 12. So when the time that it came for them to be purified, this is 33 days after the circumcision, Joseph and Mary took him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As it is written in the law of the Lord, every firstborn male is to be consecrated to the Lord. So they're doing that too at the same time. And they're offering a sacrifice in keeping with what is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of doves or 2 young pigeons. So they're doing both. So they circumcised her at the 8th day, and now 33 days later they're going to purify Mary with her ceremonial offering and consecrate Jesus. So they're doing both of those 2 things in the same day. 33 days after the circumcision. By the way, they're offering the poor offering. So Joseph and Mary were poor. They were not in the well-to-do category. Now there was a man in Jerusalem called Simeon, who was righteous and devout. He was waiting for the consolation of Israel, and the Holy Spirit was upon him. It had been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he would not die before he had seen the Lord's Messiah. So I don't know when this was revealed to him. It could have been revealed to him that day, or maybe decades ago. He apparently is pretty old. Now the next character we meet will be explicitly described as being very old. This character is not explicitly described as that, but I'm assuming he probably is. Just by the way he's presented, even though he's not explicitly called old. But at some point in his life, whether it was that morning or 50 years earlier, he had been informed by the Holy Spirit that he was going to live to see the one that they're all waiting for, the Messiah, the King, the one who's going to save Israel. He had known for some time at least that he was going to see that with his own eyes at some point before he died. Apparently this also makes it clear, at least in the man's own mind, that he himself is not going to live to see the restoration of Israel, but he will live to see the one who will do it. It had been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he would not die before he had seen the Lord's Messiah. Moved by the Spirit, he went into the temple courts. When the parents brought in the child Jesus to do for him what the custom of the law requires, I guess, is to consecrate him, Simeon took him in, because the purification rites are for Mary. Those weren't for Jesus. So I'm assuming they're talking here about the consecration of the firstborn. Simeon took him in his arms and praised God, saying, "Sovereign Lord, as you have promised, you can now dismiss your servant in peace." That sounds like an old person talking. My mom is 80, and she talks all the time about wanting to go. She's ready. So my guess is that even though the text itself doesn't explicitly call him an old person, he probably is pretty old. "For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the sight of all people, a light for revelation to the Gentiles, and for glory to your people Israel." Now this is, again, and I'm going to go ahead and go back to the Old Testament here. Like I said, I'm not usually going to do this as we read the book of Luke, but he is alluding here. He didn't exactly quote, but did allude to a section in Isaiah. We'll start at the beginning of Isaiah 9. "Nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who were in distress." Now, this is not itself an independent section. Isaiah 9 comes at the end of, actually it's kind of in the middle, not really even at the end. But this is in the middle of a section from Isaiah 7, going on to Isaiah 13, when Isaiah is dealing with an evil king named Ahaz. And this is when he gives actually the prophecy of the virgin birth in Isaiah 7, so earlier. That's part of the same context here. Ahaz is a wicked king who has been of Judah, the southern kingdom, and he is being harassed and menaced by 2 other kings, the northern king, Pekah, and then the king that's the king of the northern Israel, Pekah, and then the king of Aram, Syria, which is the country north of Israel, Rezin of Aram. So the countries to his north, Israel and then Aram, have teamed up together. They want to fight Assyria, another kingdom to the north and northeast that's going to come against all of them. And they want Judah's king, Ahaz, to join up with them. Ahaz doesn't really want to, so they're going to fight him and get rid of him and replace him with a king who will be their lapdog. Ahaz is worried about this. But Isaiah comes to him, starting in Isaiah 7, and tells him, you don't have to worry about these two kings. They're going to be gone. The Lord has promised that. And all you have to hear, by the way, Ahaz is the wicked king who does not follow the Lord. And he says, ask the Lord for a sign, any sign you want, and he will give it to you, to prove to you that these two kings are not going to get rid of you. They're going to be gone before you know it. And he doesn't. He says, I will not ask the Lord for a sign. He seems to be asking, and he's trying to sound like he's pious, and like, I'm not going to ask the Lord for a sign. I'm not going to put the Lord, the God, to the test. But he's really doing it because he's already made up his mind that he's going to appeal to the king of Assyria for help. He does not want to appeal to the God of Israel for help. He wants to appeal to the king of Assyria for help. He's already made up his mind he's going to do that. And so Isaiah, this is chapter 7, says, okay, well, I'll give you a sign anyway. The virgin is going to give birth and have a son. And by the time that son is old enough to know right from wrong, these two kings that you're dealing with right now are going to be gone. Now, in Isaiah's mind, when he's saying this, he's not thinking of 700 plus years down the road when an actual literal virgin will give birth to a son. And that's what Matthew applies it as. We know that that's the ultimate fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy there. But he's not seeing it that way. He thinks he's pointing to some young woman who's a virgin at that moment, who's going to get pregnant, get married, get pregnant, have a son, raise that son. And by the time that son is 8, 10, 12, however old a child is, if being right and wrong, I'm not sure exactly, these two kings are going to be gone. That's what Isaiah is thinking. That's what Ahaz is thinking. Now, Matthew will tell us, and did tell us in Matthew 2, that there's more to it than that. That really, in the end, yes, there is going to be an actual virgin give birth to a son, without ever having known a man. The virgin of Isaiah 7 and 8 was probably a girl that Isaiah himself ended up marrying and having a child with. And in fact, that child was born, and we read about him in Isaiah 8. And he is a sign to the Israelites that good things are going to happen to them eventually someday. And so at the end of, that's chapter 8. So the darkness and gloom of those days, that very trying time, is going to be past. And in Isaiah 9 it says, nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who were in distress, the people he's talking to at this time. In the past, God humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and he's referring to them because that's the area that was taken by the king of Assyria first. That's the first area that will be conquered by the king of Assyria when he comes down to get them all. But in the future, which is what we're reading about here in Luke 2, he will honor Galilee of the Gentiles by the way of the sea along the Jordan. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. And that's the imagery that Simeon's message here is playing on. A light for revelation to the Gentiles and for glory to your people of Israel. We're going to go ahead and read a few more verses in Isaiah 9 because this is about the coming of this righteous one, this one that Simeon was waiting for and is now holding in his arms and looking at. You have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, as men rejoice when dividing the plunder. For as in the day of Midian's defeat, that was back in the Old Testament days, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, that's the bar of slavery, the rod of their oppressor, that's the rod that their oppressors beat them with. Every warrior's boot used in battle, and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. For to us, and Simeon has this in mind when he looks at this child in his arms, a child is born. To us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. He will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. That's what Simeon is thinking of as he is holding baby Jesus here in his arms. The child's father and mother marveled at what was said about him. Then Simeon blessed them and said to Mary, his mother, this child, and this is the child of Isaiah 9, and Simeon is bringing that to mind with what he just said of his prayer. This child is destined to cause the falling and rising of many in Israel, and to be a sign that will be spoken against, so that the thoughts of many hearts will be revealed. So he's gonna reveal the hearts and minds of men, and he still does to this day. He still does to this day. In the end, the defining question for all of us, from that day until this one, anywhere in the world, anywhere throughout time, is what are we going to do with Jesus Christ? What is our response going to be to the message of this man, this Messiah, who was born here at this time? Are we going to let him be our king, or are we going to fight him? Those are our two options. There is not a third option. There is not an option to sit neutrally on the sidelines and watch the battle play out while we don't participate. That is not an option. I wish it were. For many years, I wanted it to be. I still wish it were. I still would like it to be. I like to sit on the sidelines and watch everybody else battle. But that is not an option. You're either going to submit to him and let him be your king, or you're going to fight against him and try to overthrow him, and you are going to fail if you do that. If that is the option you pick, you will fail. You are destined to fail. And a sword will pierce your own soul too. This is her son, and Mary thinks of him as a son. Okay, we're going to read here. We've read already about her pondering all this in her heart, and we're going to read, in John we see a little bit more interaction with, like, she thinks to her, he is her son. Now he is more than that. And she will come to see him as more than that. She's already been told he'll be more than that by the angel when the angel came to announce this to her. But she still sees him as a son, as her son. So a sword will pierce your own soul too. There was also a prophetess, Anna, the daughter of Phanuel, of the tribe of Asher. Now Simeon wasn't described as a prophet. He was a righteous man and devout. But Anna is described as a prophetess. She's also described as being from the tribe of Asher. Simeon's tribe was not mentioned. His name was Simeon, and there was a tribe called Simeon. So maybe he was from the tribe of Simeon, but his actual tribal identity was not mentioned. But Anna apparently still knew her tribal identity. And Asher was one of the 10 northern tribes that got conquered by Assyria in 722 BC, which is 700 years before this. And most of their tribal lines had faded over the years. Most of the tribal lines of the northern 10 tribes, or the northern tribes that were conquered by Syria, got intermingled with other peoples along the way and got diluted and faded. But apparently, not all of them did. Because here's a woman who still identifies herself as a member of the tribe of Asher. She was very old. She had lived with her husband 7 years after her marriage, and then was a widow until she was 84, or had been a widow for 84 years. So she's either 84 right now, or she's like 104, and she had been a widow for 84 years after being married for 7, and then never having married again, apparently. If she had been married for 7 years, most likely she would have gotten married around 15 or 16. So if she was married for 7 years, then that puts her at about 22 or so. If it's been 84 years since then she's about 105-ish, or she's 84. She never left the temple, but worshipped night and day, fasting and praying. Coming up to them at that very moment, she gave thanks to God and spoke about the child to all who were looking forward to the redemption of Jerusalem. So she also identifies this child as the one spoken about in Isaiah 9. When Joseph and Mary had done everything required by the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee, to their own town of Nazareth. Now, according to Matthew, they didn't do that right away. According to Matthew, they stayed in Bethlehem for at least a year until the Magi came, and that would have been about a year, and left. And then Herod came after them, and so they fled to Egypt and were there for a period of time until Herod died, which would have probably been pretty shortly thereafter. And then they came back up to Nazareth. So they did not go back to Nazareth immediately after all of this. But when it was all over, they returned to Galilee, to their own town of Nazareth. And the child grew and became strong. He was filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him.